Otherwise you won't be recorded.
This book comprises of two stories, two novellas, and they're on the theme of how human relations take place in the middle of turmoil and violence, and how they survive the ordeals of wars, revolutions, mutinies. And of course, the two speakers will ask questions on that. The first novel, the first story, is actually a continuation of two stories. One begins with a Bengali zamindar's daughter who lived in the time of the Indian Mutiny in Bengal, and how she becomes involved with a young British magistrate. And then the mutiny, they're from completely different worlds. And both the families were absolutely against it, though they were part, I've tried to show in this, the part of the Indian Renaissance, which was blossoming by the Ganges, as we say in Bengali. And this is the dichotomy which we see even now, that outwardly the Bengali upper class, the intellectuals, the zamindar class, they were all very influenced and very inspired by Western ideas and Western thought. They were sending their sons to study medicine and science in England. And they received full support from the British government, because the British government wanted a class which was a buffer class between the people and the rulers. So they encouraged this class. And mainly the zamindars in Bengal. I don't know how much of it was in the other parts of India. And they were a very privileged class. So in spite of all this inter-exchange, the Tagore family led the Bengali Renaissance. Prince Dwarakanath Tagore had a company, a trading company, shipping company with a prominent Englishman. But when I read about what this incident is, it seems that for all the intellectual and cultural exchanges that take place, do we still have a lot of our basic religion, caste, our old ideas, traditions, which separate people? I think it's still there today. And the story I've drawn is from a family, my mother's great-grandmother's sister. She's the protagonist of the first story, Radha. And she's the one who became very entranced by this young British magistrate, whose parents were also part of the Enlightened movement in Bengal. And Julian, Radha's brother and Julian became great friends, and they used to dream about how they will liberate India, how they will modernize India. But, and then they saw the 1848 revolution, and Julian encouraged Radha's brother with all these ideas. And then, against all family opposition, they got married. They actually had to run away. They had both the families were opposed, so while the parents were away, the Ruthven family on one side and Radha's family on the other side, they had a Hindu ceremony, and then they eloped on a stormy night to the district headquarters where Julian was posted. And the East India Company, hearing of this marriage, posted him to a desolate place on the Bihar-Bengal border. So they didn't mind. They were having their wonderful private idyll. They couldn't care less. And I've described the scene where this showdown takes place between Julian and Radha. And all this was narrated to me by my mother. And I have to digress a little to tell that my mother was one of those very pro-British people, and the friction she had with my father was over this, because he used to say, your family were collaborators. And he, being a great patriot, and he had joined Subhas Bose, and actually he went with Subhas Bose to meet Mussolini to raise arms for the Indian National Army. Upon which, when he arrived in Bombay in 1939, war had broken out, he was about to be arrested. So he was always saying, then my mother said, the British brought a lot of good things to us. The system which happened when the Mughal Empire was breaking down was a terribly lawless, disorderly place. And though we glorify some of the heroes, I don't know if many of you know that the Maratha marauders, they were called Burgis, they used to raid Bengal and tax people, kill people, and even in my childhood, there was a lullaby called Child, Sleep Soon, or Hide Away, the Burgis will soon be here. So they used to frighten the children with that. So in that absolute chaotic Bengal, even North India, in say the early 1700s, to some, the East India Company, of course, their depredations were terrible. And I had written an earlier novel called The Conquerors, which became a bestseller, and showed the early period of the British rule. Then they, of course, evolved. They evolved in a very constructive way. They brought in the Enlightenment. There were great Indologists who unearthed all the Sanskrit texts which had been kept under wraps because of the Islamic iconoclasm. So while this Renaissance was blooming and these two young people ran away and got married and had an idyllic time for a few months, then a mutiny broke out. And at that time, you see, the real showdown began because Julian heard that his sister had been killed in Kanpur. So he completely changed sides. And his wife left, and my mother said nobody ever knew what really happened to her. They had a son who was taken away by the grandparents to be brought up. And this is a very personal story, my sister was a very brilliant and beautiful girl. I thought of bringing her photo. And she had the same predicament when she was studying in the London School of Economics. And just like Radha 100 years ago, she had a showdown with my father, because this very brilliant English boy, who was also her fellow student, they wanted to get married. And he gave her an ultimatum, nothing doing. And when this was going on, so these are the contradictions we see in life. My father, who spoke French, German, he was one of the first foreign correspondents from India, and very enlightened man. He took a degree, PhD in Heidelberg, one in Rome. But when it came to his own family, he became very rigid, an old, rigid Hindu, Indian. And my mother, who came from a very demure background, very sheltered, educated, but not on the scale of father, very protected, she's the one who supported my sister. And what triggered off this story, this linking, is when she said one day to me, she was very upset, and my sister said, I'll leave home and I'll go back to London and work. Then my mother said, this is history repeating itself. And she was very sad, and that's when she told me this story. And so many similarities began between the story of her great-great-aunt and her daughter. Of course, at that time, I was a young girl myself, I didn't know, but things happened to her life which showed that, who knows, maybe there was something, maybe there is something that our souls which are troubled in this existence goes on to another. My publisher, after saying a lot of rude things about me in their book launch in Delhi, finally, he said, authors, good authors, successful authors are a publisher's delight. Then he looked at me and said, but Achala is a publisher's nightmare. He said, she goes over every syllabus, corrects again. And he said, when he read this story, he said, it was just that, which he said, I am an atheist, but I almost started believing in these things, the way she writes, the coincidences which happen. So this was what prompted me to write the first story. And the second one, again on the same theme, of the clash of cultures, the clash of people, the opposition people face when they want to transcend or transgress the boundaries of race and creed. And this is a story who was more of a friend, distant cousin, and it was a troubled family, so they sent her to live with my parents for a while. And it was a time which it never occurred to me before until the Afghanistan problem began. My father was posted in Rome at that time for many years, and King Zahir Shah of Afghanistan came to have an eye surgery. And while he was undergoing this surgery, his cousin, Prince Daud Khan, deposed him in a bloodless coup. There were no killings, nothing. He didn't touch one person there. And this young lady, who I have called Minoti, she becomes involved with a young Afghan lecturer at the college where I was studying, University College. And my father used to go and meet Zahir Shah. He was a person who really loved, to see all these dramatic events unfold. And Zahir Shah told father that this is the beginning of trouble for my poor country. And they tried, the Italian government, my father's friends, they all tried to persuade him to set up a government in exile in Rome. And this wonderful man said, no, I don't want a civil war. I don't want to divide my people. Then he said that idiot will in any case mess up everything, meaning Prince Daud, which what happened. And then this young Afghan lecturer used to visit us, and he was in the midst of this. He left, like many of us who I was telling my colleague here, those of us who studied abroad, many of us at that our generation, we came back to serve. It was not the El Dorado to go abroad and make money. We really believed we could serve our country, we could do things with our ability, whatever we had. So he went back to Afghanistan and got caught in the most terrible. I don't think, after medieval times, I don't think people have seen the carnage that poor Afghanistan has shown. And I've dedicated this second story to them. And when I was Education Secretary, there was a UNESCO meeting in Islamabad. And at that time, the Hekmatyar and all of them were ruling there. So I asked the Education Minister of Pakistan, who was a gorgeous lady. I don't think she had a thought about education in her head. She was a figurehead. Her husband was a very powerful, thug-like gentleman, and I think who was then the Prime Minister, Pakistan, I forget. So they all wanted to keep him happy, so they gave her. So Begum Sahiba asked me very quietly after the meeting, can you get me to Kerala? Can you arrange a meeting in Kerala about education? So I said, yes, easiest thing done. They said, she wanted all these, spas. I said, then I thought this is, my chance to do it. So I said, madam, I want something in return for this. Yes, would you like an onyx table? I said, no, I want to go to the Afghanistan border. She said, no, even Allah can't take you there. Sorry, that's terrible. So I said, then no Kerala spa. And she arranged it, and we got special permission, went to Takshashila, which, as a former DG of the SI, I said, they have kept it so beautifully. The gold coins of Alexander's army are there. They have disappeared from our country. And this was my running battle with the smugglers in ASI, for which I got into considerable disfavor with very powerful politicians. They have kept everything beautifully. Then I said, now we have to cross the border. And I'm so glad it happened. And I had heard about Afghanistan from my father, because he had gone up to the border with Netaji, who had escaped from his house, disguised as a Kabuliwala. And the Afghans helped him. 2 Afghans came, it's a famous story. 2 Afghans, Kabuliwalas as we call them, 2 of them came to the Bose house with their dried fruits, bags. Every year they would come from the So the police people didn't, they were just selling fruits. And one of them gave his clothes to Netaji with a false beard, and he escaped with the other Kabuliwala. And the other Afghan stayed back, God knows what clothes. And they boarded the Pathankot mail, Punjab mail, Pathankot, and then to Kabul, where Zahir Shah received them. So I wanted to see this place, and it's after seeing Afghanistan that it was already being, destroyed after the civil war. So that is when I thought I must write another story of this. I had written one novel about the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, and the Russians said, "You're the only person who have tried to show the predicament we are in." So anyway, these are the two stories. I'll ask my two friends to add to it.
Thank you, Achala. I'm not going to again describe the actual novels because I think Achala has given us a very excellent summary of both the novels. But I do hope all of you will be persuaded to buy the book, which is available for sale outside. It's a beautiful book. It's called Phantom Lovers, and it's the two separate stories. The first one, as she says, is called
With Fate Conspire.
With Fate Conspire. That is from Omar Khayyam, of course. Could you and I love With Fate Conspire to shatter this cup and mold it closer to heart's desire? So it's the story of how lovers transcend time and space to do this. And the other story is Wait, with an exclamation mark. And again, it's taken from a poem. I think in this case, a Russian poem. And it's about waiting, which is a part of true love. So they're very romantic stories in a way.
Latha, would you like to read that for me?
It's a beautiful poem. I would love to read it.
Please read it.
I would love to read that. It's right in the beginning, right?
You see, while they were dying in Stalingrad, a lot of poetry was coming out of the Russian.
It says, it's by Konstantin Simonov, and the poem reads, "Wait for me and I'll come back. Wait when dreary yellow rains. Wait when friends tell you you should not. Wait when snow is falling fast. Wait when summer is hot. Wait when yesterdays are past and others are forgot. Wait when from that far-off place letters don't arrive. Wait when those with whom you wait doubt if I'm alive." And that really is the story of Wait. Because it's essentially about star-crossed lovers who are separated and who have long periods of silence. And the question is, will they have time to wait for each other? Will they have the inclination to wait for each other? How are they going to handle the separation?
Tell them about how they keep writing.
They do keep writing, and they write imaginary letters or actual letters even when they don't know how to send them to each other. Because Rustum, the Afghan, Rustum Feghani, the Afghan hero, so to speak, is imprisoned in Kandahar in a jail, and he has no way of communicating with her, with Minoti, the heroine. And yet he keeps writing either mentally or actually physically letters. She keeps writing to him. She keeps writing letters. And somewhere, somehow, I think this gets transmitted, through some kind of extrasensory perception, call it a mystic bond, call it what you like. But haven't you ever had that experience where you're thinking very much of somebody and at that exact moment the person calls you? So it's not far-fetched, to think that there is a plane on which we communicate with each other, which is not the normal way of communication that we think of, letters, phone calls, etc. There is something more, and it's happened more than once with me, with a lot of people.
You call it telepathy.
Telepathy, exactly. It's mental telepathy.
Manifestation.
Yes, of course, of course. And so, this is actually a very interesting concept to explore. And I think that's what's exemplified in Wait. Because under the most adverse circumstances, when they don't hear from each other for years, they still cling to that faith in their love. And neither of them finds another partner, even though they have many opportunities. In fact, Minotti has a very persistent suitor, Naveen Roy, who her parents suggest for her. And she actually persuades him to agree to a sham engagement to get her parents off her back. And at the very end, she has to tell her parents that I'm not going to marry Naveen or anybody. I'm going to live on my own and teach and so on. And she just teaches, keeps waiting, keeps hoping. And she gets one letter from him in all those years of separation. I think it's 5 years, 7 years? 7 years of separation. She gets one letter smuggled to a British diplomat who has some contacts with him. And that's very early on, before he's imprisoned. So after that, she's heard nothing for 5 or 6 years. And yet she's constant. And he also has opportunities to marry an Afghan woman. He doesn't agree. First to a princess, then to the jailer's daughter. He withstands both matches. And he says, no, I can't marry where my heart is not there. And so, it's really a beautiful love story. And I made a few notes about it. And what I wanted to say was that it's really a saga. It's a love story to the people of Afghanistan. It's talks so much about the beauty of the country. And I've been to Afghanistan. It really is a very naturally beautiful country, though it's completely, a lot of it has been destroyed very badly by the incessant wars. And it goes from ancient times onwards, and the story, and right from the ancient links between India, Afghanistan, the Hindu Kush area, as it was called in those days, and with the connections with Persia as well, and so on, and right up to modern times, the links that exist. And of course, enemy's enemy being your friend, India is always Afghanistan's friend, because Pakistan is the common enemy, so to speak. And there's a great philosophical examination throughout the book, the second novella, of the historical links between India and Afghanistan, which I found also exciting. And I think that's again goes back to the Achala ji's experience in the Archaeological Survey of India, because she had a very profound knowledge of Gandhara art, for example, which was the way that it developed in Kandahar, actually, where you have the sculptures which have a clear Indian influence, very clear Indian influence, and beautiful sculptures of the Buddha and so on as well over there. And there's also, I think apart from the historical links, the archaeological links, the tragic history of this war-torn country, you have the prejudices that exist between religions, because the reaction of the families, whether it's his family in Afghanistan saying, how can you marry a kafir? Or it's her family saying, how can you marry a Muslim? There are...
Why don't you read that showdown, one of the letters?
The showdown letter, which...
That underneath all the cosmopolitanism.
The father's letter, right?
There's a lot of clarish here,
Yeah,
where the both...
You'll have to give me a moment to look for that. I think it's on...
Shall I find it?
Yeah, why don't you find it? You probably know the book much better than I do. Though I've read it twice. The first time I galloped through it because I wanted to know what was going to happen to them, and the second time I read it with attention. I think it's after the father goes back to Calcutta, but much later. You see, the parents go back to Calcutta. They've been posted in Rome. And the funny thing is, they've actually met King Zahir Shah and been introduced to him by Rustum. And the king is a fascinating figure. He's a very wise man who doesn't want to plunge his country into civil war, a very enlightened man who doesn't oppose the marriage between Rustum and Minotti, and a very benevolent monarch, so to speak. And as Achala said, he was really heartbroken that his country would never know peace again. And that's what happened. During his reign, they had peace. After his reign, they never had peace again. After he was deposed, and then everybody came. You know, the Russians came, the Americans came, the Russians left, the Americans left, and now it's just open civil war, and the Taliban has taken over again. You know, and it's a terrible situation for the people of Afghanistan, and there's a very heartrending passage where they talk about people in their desperation picking fungus-infected bread out of dustbins to eat and then falling ill, and there being no drugs to treat their infections. It is really heartbreaking, you know, to read of the kind of people selling their children for $200. You know, it's heartrending to hear this. I mean, it's not that we don't have injustices in our country or we haven't seen equally horrendous behavior here, but or deprivation for that matter. But at the same time, I think, you know, there is hope always that there is a sort of aspirational development happening in India. So many people who were earlier very poor have been lifted out of poverty and so on. And of course, the poor always get poorer and the rich always get richer. That's a different story. But I think, you know, it really makes you very grateful for what we have. Very, very grateful. Have you found the letter?
There, Ruth,
Yeah.
there is where Minoti's father gives her the
Ultimatum.
ultimatum, and this is where General Fergani gives
His son the ultimatum.
last.
Good.
Yeah.
So I'll do both then. Yeah, thank you. Okay. So the father writes to the daughter, "My dear daughter, the sophistication which has enchanted you is skin deep. He is of a race that invaded our country for many centuries. They scorn us because they conquered us. Islam is intolerant of other creeds and recommends conversion at sword point. Do you wish to cast aside the cultural heritage of 5,000 years and the magnificent faith in which you were raised? If you marry Rustam Farghani, you will never be allowed inside a temple. No relation or friend of yours will invite you to their religious ceremonies. You will be an outcast from your own society. And what can you expect from Rustam's world? They will tolerate you, no more. Not all your education and accomplishments will bring you the honor or recognition that you would receive in your own world. Then when the powerful husband wearies of you, he will declare talaq, the arbitrary decree and freedom that the Sharia law gives to a man to abandon a blameless wife. We have seen this happen numerous times. Will you then return to your Bapa Bari, father's home, hurt and humbled? Will you bring your children to us, shell-shocked and abandoned? Or will you be forced to leave them behind in the Ferghani mansion to an Afghan stepmother? Think very clearly, Minotti. There is a clash of civilizations between Rustam's world and ours. Nothing can obliterate the antagonism, overt or covert, that has accumulated over a millennium." Whoops. Do we wait for it to come back? Yeah. Yeah. You have been away at London University for many years. Loneliness obscures one's vision. Once you are in your own environment, you will realize that what I say is valid. Do not embark on this dangerous journey. If you do so, we will disown you. Your father, Bihari. And so, you know, this goes on, and she continues her dilemma of what should she do. When the father's reaction, on the other hand, of Ferghani, General Ferghani, he's a general, when his son tells him that I'm going to marry Minotti and nobody else, he says, "I do not believe this. You who are a descendant of Zahiruddin Babur, conqueror of India, want to marry an obscure kafir And then this goes on, you know, he says, are you sure about our lineage and so on and so forth, the son. And he says, do you want to commit political harakiri by allying with the deposed king? Destroy yourself then, but do not drag me down with you. If you pursue this path, I will disown you. So both are going to disown their children, all on the basis that they want to marry outside their religion and to a certain extent their nationality. Now I mustn't hog the mic, I must give General Krishnan a chance.
I'm enjoying it as well.
Yeah. So let me move on to the first novel, you know, and what I have to say about the first novel is as Achala ji has said, With Fate Conspire is about Julian Ruthven and Radha Chaudhary, these ill-fated lovers who fall in love across nationalities, across all barriers, have to elope, and so on. And exactly a little bit more than a century later, because I think they meet around 1955. 60s. And then the second couple, Alex and Minotti, you know, no, Madhushri, sorry, Alex and Madhushri meet in 1961 in London. So, you know, they again have, and it's interesting because there are echoes of the links between the two stories all the time, you know, of a Englishman being attracted to an Indian woman and having to battle all kinds of barriers for this. And as I said, in this particular case, while there's no other woman or other man, so to speak, as there is in the case of Rustum, where brides are being constantly thrust at him and bridegrooms are being thrust at Minotti, I think it's more a problem of miscommunications and letters going astray and things like that. So, but again there, you know, the question is, will they be constant? Will they wait for each other? And what I found was that it's really, you know, I found the book resounds with mystic connections between both Julian and Radha and Alex and Madhushri. Alex particularly finds himself with a profound understanding of the eternal love of Julian and Radha. You know, he's haunted by their love story, I think much more than Madhushri is. And he believes they have relived that love to a certain extent and lived the happy life together that was denied to Julian and Radha. And, you know, this particular story is dedicated to Achala's sister, Aloka Moulik, whose life did, in fact, as she's told us, mirror some aspects of the story. And it's a deeply philosophical examination of the nature of love, is what I found with the first book, which transcends time, which transcends distance, which transcends all barriers that we think of. But which brings me to a question which I'm going to leave with Achala, which she can answer now or later after General Krishnan speaks, because I'm sure he'll ask some questions as well. All your protagonists, both Indian, English, and Afghanistan, and from Afghanistan, have a similar international background where they were educated abroad, both at the school and the college level. Maybe not in school for the people in the novel, but certainly the university level. And open to all cultures and religions. They're remarkably open people. Even the one in 1957 is so open to the idea of foreign cultures and foreign religions. Is this culled from your own life? Because your parents were on diplomatic assignments, and your novels are also set in London, Rome, and even partially in the US with Naveen. And all places which you have lived in, you know, and been educated in. is this autobiographical context relevant at all to how you portray the characters? And particularly the question of Aloka's story, I think obviously haunted you for a long time. So in a way, you've maybe exercised that phantom when you wrote this novel, the first one. And to a certain extent, that same idea of mystical longing, uh, links across time and space are also there in the second book, Wait. So I'll leave that question with you, Achala, and I'll pass it on to General Krishnan.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure being here, and I must thank Miss Achala. I think I prefer referring to her as Achala. I hope you won't take an offense to that. You know, what's the book about? That it has 2 novellas, and the titles of the book have already been covered. It's actually, both of them are very romantic love stories and love story thrillers, and a reminiscence of history, in equal measure, interwoven so beautifully. I must make a small disclaimer here before I say anything. Although soldiers are amongst the most romantic people, whole life they are in a virtual romantic world of their own, but they are never called to speak on love stories by anyone. And that holds good in my case too. But Achala still wanted me to speak on a book, and I reckon that it's because backdrop of both the stories actually it's a mix of world order, power rivalry, misery brought about by wars, uprisings, rebellion and turmoil, and how they tear apart societies and lives of people. So without doubt, people who can best empathize with such tragic environment and setting are soldiers. Without doubt, that I can guarantee that. And so I guess maybe that's the reason why she insisted, Krishnan, you must speak. On a serious note, coming to Phantom Lovers, you've already been told, she told us, and Latha also told us, the story bears very close resemblance to Achala's sister's life. And it is also, Achala tells us that it's built around the narrative of 2 celestial lovers in Rabindranath Tagore's work, Shap Mochan. Is that so? The story opens with the Indian Renaissance, about which Achala made a passing mention, which was guided in part by Warren Hastings and marked by the establishment of Asiatic society. She also traces, again, like she had made a passing mention, the active role of Dwarkanath Tagore. Was he a predecessor of Rabindranath Tagore? Grandfather, okay. And Rajaram Mohan Roy in introduction of social reforms in India. And through all this, she actually points out the paradox of a British-inspired Indian Renaissance taking place along with swift expansion of the British Empire in India. 2 contradictory things, but both going hand in hand. And also through the eyes and feelings of a character, Julian, about whom I think Latha has made us all familiar now. Achala very subtly puts across the lesser known or lesser talked about, maybe a better way to say, harsh face of the British rule on either side of 1857. And sums up how the British exploited India, in Achala's own words. Fed on Indian raw material, enriched by revenues from Indian princes, landlords and workers, the Industrial Revolution gained momentum in Britain. That's how she sums up the whole thing. But beyond her well-reasoned criticism of the British, she also gives them credit where it is due for bringing back education, law and order and science in India after a gap of almost 7 centuries of disruption because of Muslim invasion and rule. Achala describes the tragic events of 1857, the dilemma of a British administrator who feels for India. That is through her character Julian. During all the turmoil of 1857 and the tragedy taking place on both sides, killing each other, he is someone who she projects as a British administrator who she's told us the connection of who Julian was, who actually had a very strong connect with her predecessors, ancestors. She projects his dichotomy. When he says, the tragedy of my predicament is that Indians whom I have come to serve call me an oppressor. And the British Raj in whose service I am in think that I am a traitor. So these are the fine points which I must admit, I am not a voracious reader, but it still hits you so hard. It comes across so beautifully. And Achala's description of Julian's state of mind after his lover Radha went to an ashram is strikingly tender. Latha's given us an overview of it. It reminds one of the deeply touching final scenes of the wonderful movie, at least some of you would have seen Gladiator, where the hero Maximus, played by the evergreen Russell Crowe, after being stabbed to death, floats in the Garden of Heaven, actually where he meets his wife and daughter who had been killed earlier. That's the state to which Achala takes us in that narration of that particular incident. Also, Achala's very intimate and in-depth knowledge of history and literature comes through very, very clearly in the story. After reading With Fate Conspire, that is the first novella, one feels compelled to read Kadambari of 7th century, which I didn't know till I read Achala's book, is the first novel written in India, possibly in the world. Achala also takes full advantage of every opportunity to raise very relevant geopolitical issues at different points in history. To quote one example, going back to the Cuban crisis days, through her characters, she questions why does President Kennedy think he has the right to encircle Soviet Union with intercontinental ballistic missiles, while they themselves maintain that Soviets themselves cannot keep a few missiles in Cuba. I'm sure you will find that this bears some similarity even to the Ukraine equation. Achala's recounting of events of the subcontinent in 1971 and run up to the 1971 Indo-Pak War through her character Alexander's eyes is actually a very true narration of what actually happened in East Pakistan. She tells us how the world chose to look away when the tragic genocide was happening in East Pakistan in 1971, with China and the US actually colluding to keep India at bay, and how Russia came to India's rescue and the Russian fleet stymied the US 7th Fleet, which helped us actually bring the war to a conclusion. Let me also tell you a little bit about the second story, which is titled Wait. And the backdrop for Wait, as Latha has already told us in such fine details, it's Afghanistan, a country and society which has been torn apart by violence and war for decades. With a very, Achala's Russian connect, a very special Russian connect is very well known. Maybe that's the reason why she's derived the title for the second story from one of her favorite Russian poems, I'm sure, Achala, which Latha told us is titled Wait for Me, and she just read it out. Such a beautiful poem it is. Now, right at the outset of the second novella, Achala establishes a distinct Bengali connect with Afghanistan, describing how the Kabuliwalas, she told us how the Kabuliwalas helped Subhash Bose to escape from the British dressed as a Kabuliwala himself. Now, the story of Wait is actually the story of an Afghan academician. The person is an academician, and the Indian student, which is Minoti. And again, so beautifully portrayed by Achala. She says these two finding sanctuary in the capital of a country, that is London, which she points out had paradoxically waged wars of conquest on both their nations, India and Afghanistan. As an Indian who very closely follows geopolitics and national security, Achala, I must say that I really like your implied references to the idea of an independent Pashtunistan, which takes into fold a lot of parts of the northwestern Pakistan. I think we must encourage this idea. Now, as an aside, to all the serious and the romantic and the tragic things that she has described, I must say that the Indian sari finds a very prominent place in all of Achala's writings and books. The main character in both the stories, in both the novellas, flaunt this beautiful traditional Indian attire around the world, whichever part of the world they travel. I think that's something very heartening to note, Achala. Maybe because you yourself are so fond of it and very, very pretty saris. Coming back to the story proper, Wait, Achala very succinctly captures the rich cultural mosaic of Afghanistan, which Latha told us how beautiful the countryside is. But Achala also captures Afghanistan for what it was known, long lost kind courtesy, the global power rivalries, even during our lifetime. She recalls the Afghanistan, which was a rainbow of different cultures, languages, ethnicities, and where even different approaches to Islam actually flourished like nowhere else in the world. She also tells us about the great Afghan poet Jalaluddin Rumi, who infused Islam with Hindu mysticism, which gave rise to Sufism. It's very interesting to note, I didn't know this fact through Achala's stories, that the Afghan national anthem recognizes 14 different ethnic groups. It embraces all of them. Pashtuns, Tajiks, Hazaras, Uzbeks, Baluchis, Gujars, Afghan, Arabs, and the rest. I must again say, with no pretense of being a literary critic or even being a keen literary student. If someone like Achala was around, maybe I would have taken far more interest in history than I did in school, rather than just study physics, and which was the only subject I was interested in. I must say I found Achala's use of terms like, warring dreams, pondering with unseeing eyes, etc. very, very fascinating. In fact, I must tell you that I have owned these words now. I have made them my own. Also, even a casual fiction reader like me gets hooked. When you come across terms like Ritorna Vincitor, you must tell us in the end a little bit about Vincitor. But all that I would say, to put it in perspective, is that you have surely absorbed and enjoyed every opera that you went to. Amidst all this, there is also humor and, shall I say, a streak of fierce independence that seeps through in Achala's writings. I'll recall one instance in the story. Past midnight, when a tipsy pedestrian on the streets of London, walking past Achala's character Minoti, passes a comment, "Hello, black eyes." So, Minoti actually promptly turns around and retorts, "Good morning, blue eyes. Go home safely to your mom." Having known Achala not too much, but a little, I sometimes suspect it's Achala's own, character seeping through a little also. Is that true, Achala? I must also say that King Hussain, I think a little bit has been talked about him. In Achala's story, he's a very down-to-earth person. Latha explained to us how he comes across in the story. How he says, in Achala's words, how quickly one becomes redundant without the panoply of power. It's such a, every word of it is so true. And also the hero, Rustam's father, wondering as to, Latha read it out for us. Now, Rustam's father was wondering as to why his son wants to marry an obscure kafir despite his profound ancestry. Minotti's father probably was thinking exactly the opposite. Let me also bring out some very interesting historical issues and facts that Achala has woven so nicely into the story. One is the dilemma of the Afghan diplomats finding their President Daud, whose name was mentioned in the passing, firmly inclined towards US, despite the Soviet Union's record of standing by Afghanistan through very difficult times. Very subtly she brings out this nuanced geopolitical issue. Also, how in late 1977, liberal Iranians failing to garner the US support actually turned to the dangerous alternative of Ayatollah Khomeini, who was in exile in France at that time, which resulted in the Iranian revolution. And Achala actually poses a question to the world at large through her character Rustam, who's the Afghan academic Minotti's lover. He says the Afghan economy is in ruins, people are facing horrifying food shortage, medicines are hard to come by, Afghanistan has been bombed, mined and destroyed. And all this done by countries that claim to be gatekeepers of democracy. And going further, sadly, the victims of this destruction were not Talibans, whom they were targeting, but the victims were the helpless Afghan people. I suppose this continues till date. And then there is something that only a person like Achala can do, and that is to bring out the tragedies of war and strange inconsistencies of geopolitics while actually narrating a romantic love story. I don't know how she combines all this, because they are such distinct stories which interest certain sections of people, but she's actually interwoven these so beautifully. And some of these inconsistencies that she has put in the book, which even if you have no interest in geopolitics and such issues, you will still read and take note of. One is the CIA colluding on the one hand with Pakistan's ISI to engineer an Islamist uprising in Afghanistan, while on the other, the same CIA using the very same ISI to suppress Islamist movement in Iran. You just can't imagine such things happening. But that's the inconsistency which you will find so often in geopolitics, and she has so beautifully brought it out. The great ease with which Achala shifts back and forth, between tragic historical events, war tragedies, and the romantic love stories makes her book very unique and special. I can assure you, like I said, I don't claim to be even a voracious reader. I do read, but I'm not a voracious reader. You pick up that book and start, and you will not put it down till you finish. I guarantee you that. So all in all, ladies and gentlemen, Fandom Lovers is a very captivating work. Whether you're looking for a deeply touching romantic story, or a story of war-torn societies, or even a thriller, Achala's Fandom Lovers is the book for you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
There was a question you asked about whether it's autobiographical.
How much is autobiography?
Yeah, quite a bit is autobiographical. As I said earlier, the very first story of the background of the mutiny is from my mother's family side, and the complete disruption it created in the lives of two people. And the irony was that the young magistrate was shot by his own subaltern because when in the siege of Delhi, because they suspected he had, in inverted commas, gone native, that he's gone over to the British, and this was tantamount to treason. So this story circulated in the family. Nobody spoke about it until my mother began telling us about this, and she had this terrible premonition that this story would be again repeated in her daughter's life. So it is quite a bit autobiographical, and the story of Madhushri and Alexander is my sister's story in university. I had to change some of the ending because I thought the ending was a little bleak, what really happened. And what made me change was, it was around the time of COVID. And I was in Manipal Hospital and kept to my room. The nurses were very attentive, everything. But one day I just strayed out and saw six trolleys being taken out. And the nurses were hysterical. They tried to push me in because our very nice chief secretary had told them, please take care of this lady. So they were trying to push me out of what's happened. And I stood my ground and watched these things. And then the whole thing seemed that, and then my literary guru, she was head of a very good publishing house in England. When I showed her the ending, she also knew Aloka. She said, there is so much grief in the world, and death is just surrounding us. And she mentioned how in European cities the churches were being used as morgues. Said, give it a happy ending. So I had to change the ending. And as Latha mentioned about the cosmopolitan nature of these people, I grew up from the age of 5 till 22. I was with my parents abroad. So the people I met were those who had this worldview, who might have been very patriotic, English or Italian or Russian and Indian. But I think at that point, it is not so much now, you would know being in the Foreign Service, but that eclectic, tolerant, that very eager to disown the past. They were at that moment very eager, the European powers, not America, to sort of apologize for what they did, and they wanted to atone for what they had done to their subject nation. I think that made them very cosmopolitan people. Maybe it was atonement. That has gone now. Arrogance has come back. So these people I met, and friends and others, I think we had that, and our parents encouraged us also to have a very worldview, not to be chauvinistic. You can be very patriotic and still have respect for others. So that worldview, Weltanschauung as the Germans call it, is part of my growing up in those countries. And the people I met were also like that, Indians and Afghans, foreigners.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much. I really liked that aspect, that how open the characters were to other cultures, to other religions, to people of different backgrounds, and it didn't seem to make any difference about the way they felt about each other. And in both the novellas, whether it's Dilip and I'm not even talking about the romantic relationships. I'm saying Dilip and Julian, what good friends they become. And, similarly, Rustum has other friends like Terence,
Yes.
the UK diplomat, and Ivan, I think, the Russian diplomat, who stand by him through thick and thin, and who are there for him, when things are very rough for him. So that I think is that universality of outlook. So of course the real crux is how they overcome this barrier of nationality and race to fall in love with somebody, from the other country or the other race. But apart from that, even the friendships are very telling, very, very telling.
And these friendships are tried, they are tried and tested in times of crisis.
They are indeed. So, would someone like to ask a question? Yeah.
Thank you to the panel because you've given us a very good appreciation of what's in the book. Now, it's more the fleshing out and the, the subtle detailing and all the tapestry work of the book that I will be looking forward to. But, Madame, you spoke of one point which was, I think, taken on by both the panelists, and that was about how, your parents in the second part of the first novella, and Radha's parents in the first story of the first novella, despite being, Renaissance people or, cosmopolitan, world exposed sort of people, how they were very closed in a certain sense, where it came to personal choices or personal decisions. My own experience, because I think we've all been fortunate enough to have grown up in very, I hesitate to use the word these days because it's become more of a bad word, liberal and accepting Catholic sort of households, where we were really, like the Rig Veda says, noble thoughts from all sides. There were winds blowing from all directions in our homes. But I think at some point, not taking those of us who are fortunate, but at some point, what one sees is not so much about a decision of a family based on their own outlook or their philosophy or their upbringing or the family's positioning in a cultural milieu, but more about power and control, and as I see it, even in today's India, many times I'm asked this question, earlier in India, you did, of course, have, communal tensions and flare-ups. But they were at a certain point for a very, very specific reason. For instance, partition, it was horrific, but there was a huge reason behind it. It wasn't frivolous, it wasn't, engineered, it wasn't kind of pre-planned in that sense. But I think one of the reasons why one maintained, that sort of peace, huge peace, despite the fact that perhaps, every second village in India, has a Hindu neighbor and a Muslim neighbor, or a Hindu neighbor and a Christian neighbor. I think one of the reasons is what you were talking about, that in their external manifestations, work, that is professionalism, or travel, or, purchase or sale, they were very, very open-minded. They didn't mind doing business with people from other communities or other faiths, and so on and so forth. But where it came to personal relations or a personal lifestyle, it was kept very secluded. We all know, I think we've all been part of, villages or small towns where we've had neighbors from another faith. And the main reason, one of the main reasons why relations have been so good is it's never involved marrying into that household or eating their food. Now, an outsider might say that sounds very retrogressive, but perhaps it was nature's own way of ensuring that the peace was kept. And the greatest irony of it all is today we've moved towards being such a homogeneous society. It's no longer a surprise that people are marrying outside their immediate communities, outside their own faiths, outside their own nationalities. In fact, today it's shocking when you marry within your faith and within your nationality, unlike what it was earlier. And yet the more homogeneous we are becoming, the more intolerant and the more violent we're getting towards one another's faith. the faith. So I really don't understand this phenomenon, and maybe that should be the backdrop or the subject as to why, when, today every second person I know has married somebody from another faith and another nationality. So with all this homogenization, you'd think there'd be more acceptance, there'd be more tolerance. But I see it's just the opposite, and I wonder, I have no answers, I just wonder why that's happening.
Please.
I'd like to address that question, if I may, Renuka. This is, I think because the whole ecosystem has changed now, around us. And while you're right, people from our kind of liberal backgrounds intermarry now without too much fuss about it. I have several relatives who've married outside religion, across nationalities, etc. That's not still true for the majority of Indians. There's still fierce opposition in villages and small towns, and people face terrible problems when they try to break these barriers of caste. There are honor killings, there's khap panchayats, so I think we shouldn't judge just by the standards of the upper middle class, elite, urban population. You have to look at the overall population. And therefore, I don't think it was as homogeneous as we thought it was. In our privileged little worlds, we thought it was very homogeneous. And it was. Within that world, it was homogeneous. But outside of that world, it was not. The same prejudices continued.
I mean, even globally.
Yeah.
You've never had so many international marriages. Or
Correct.
not just marriages, even international coexistence, like students migrating in huge numbers, living side by side with, foreign classmates and so on in the same apartments or whatever. And yet, like today, if you see an average upper middle class Indian origin American family, it could be doctors, it could be people from the IT sector, they're all on, Bill and Joan and Jean terms in the office. But the moment they come home, they're running to meet their own little Indian groups or their own little Telugu groups or their own little Tamil groups. So, why? I mean, this is my point. On the one hand, it's getting so homogeneous. And on the other hand, it's like Poland saying we don't want refugees, or so-and-so saying we don't want, so Denmark, castigating X, Y, and Z. So this is my point. Yes, definitely what you say about India is very, very valid. But even globally, since she's, kind of given us a little quick tour of the world, it's really, I sometimes wonder perhaps those days things were clearer. You just got shot because of this. Now, the problem is on the one hand, you're having these unions, and on the other hand, you're having people say, we don't want this, or we don't want those, or, so that's what I haven't been able to really turn my head around.
I think that's a very, very
Can
interesting...
you use the mic, please?
I think that's a very interesting strand to develop on. Maybe somebody can do a little bit of study or just ponder over it for a while, and maybe it'll give enough material to write more than a book.
Yeah. Achala, would you like to comment on that?
It's a very confusing situation. It's this lady, Suella Braverman, trying to be more English than the English, and saying that, Palestinians, no pro-Palestinian protests. And I think this, the British showed that. I really said, bravo, London, to myself, that these 3 lakh people went in protest and marched, and that maybe there was some kind of wider feeling, wider sympathy. And this lady trying to show she's more English than the English, no immigrants, no protests, she got it in the neck, and well-deserved. So it's a very confusing picture. This Italian Prime Minister came to power promising all liberal things, Silvia Berlusconi's protege. The minute she came to power, she had become anti-immigration, everything. So one doesn't know. I just read today just one of Abraham Lincoln's quotation that people can overcome adversity, people can overcome sorrows, but most people can, he said. But give a man a power, and then you see what he's really like.
I think also, there are two totally different things. One is being idealist. We would all like to be, but then when you are made in charge, you have to be a little practical. Now, imagine being swarmed by immigrants for whatever reasons. They may be well justified in moving away from their land of origin and going to whichever place they can. But look at it from the other people's side also, I think. So, I don't think these are so clearly cut out, problems with cut out solutions. It is totally different when you view it as a, let's say the same way you said, a liberal, open-minded person, and when you are in charge to look after a particular country, or you are the person in charge, you have to be a little more practical also. So maybe the truth lies somewhere in between, and you can't fault them totally.
Well, if I can use an example that I used to use when I was an ambassador abroad, I used to tell people the problem with India is that you have from the 14th century to the 21st century existing side by side in the same person. Because a man may be a nuclear scientist, where his technology and his technological knowledge, his expertise is of the 21st century. But in his beliefs, he may be completely Middle Ages. He may be completely of the 16th century, where he thinks his daughter has to be married off as early as possible, where he doesn't believe in equal education for boys and girls. And I've met many people like this, and they don't see a dichotomy between the modernity of their technical education and the sort of really antiquated thinking they indulge in when it comes to societal values.
Yeah, I think that's what we talk about. That is the disinterested side. That's my job. That's what I have to espouse to the country. But when it comes to my own personal life, that's where things shift and change.
Well, look at the book. That's what happens in the book. The parents were probably very liberal. When all those parents must have had friends of different backgrounds. They must have welcomed them. The Indian Prime Minister has been welcomed as an honored guest in Kabul. But General Faghani didn't object to that. But what he objects to is my son can't marry a Indian. My son can't marry a Hindu.
Even within that, Achala makes a distinct difference between the father and the mother.
Yeah.
Invariably, the mothers are more, open to even in those very strictly personal areas, far more than fathers.
Yeah, the mothers are sympathetic in all the cases. That's true. Whereas it's the fathers who lay down the law and say you shall not.
But I don't know whether that's actually the true or that's because of her bias.
Sorry?
My mother,
No, but I believe that to be true.
No, in her case, she did give us the background. See,
Yeah,
her
no,
mother was
and I believe that to
very
be true.
pro-British and father wasn't so much.
she was more tolerant, she didn't have, but under all that cosmopolitan, this is what amazed me all through my life, that multilingual, United Nations, everything, and he was very much of a European in some ways. But when it comes to personal things, he was very traditional. Mother wasn't.
I think that happens with, it's actually if you take out the exceptions, I think that's true. Mothers, I don't know, that's my experience wherever I've seen, not just my mother, they are far more accommodating than fathers are. Fathers may roam around the whole of the world and be, out of the house 24/7, but when it comes to the crux, I think they tend to be more closed.
Sorry, only to add to what you said about Mrs. Braverman. She's actually, herself of pretty mixed heritage, because her father is a Goan Christian who was settled in Kenya, because you get many of those in the UK who got British passports, who are what called British overseas subjects. And her mother was a Mauritian of Tamil Hindu heritage. But she's married to a gentleman of a Jewish faith. So maybe that's why she's holds some of the views she does.
I see.
And of course, there's a lot more can be said about the current situation in UK, but I think it's beyond the scope of our discussion.
Anyway, I love the name for her, Cruella Suella.
And it's very unfortunate that Suella, automatically suggests so many not so flattering rhymes.
I think close to time.
Any more questions? Well, thank you so very much. I think this interweaving of large historical events as a backdrop, all this crossing of borders and across communities and all that, and also the evoking of autobiography with family stories from the past. I think it's made for a wonderful evening, and we all look forward to reading the book. Thank you so much.
But that's just a last request. In the second edition, you must give us the actual ending of, which you modified.
As we say in Bengali, bless your lips that there'll be a second edition.
I'm sure there will.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.